Okay. All right, so guys, thank you guys for joining me tonight. What we're going to be doing is this is a new show for me. I'm calling it Story Time with Kurt, and the whole point of it is for me to read to you as if your dad or your grandfather was reading to you, to just let you chill out and listen to a story. I am not reading this as if it were an audiobook. I'm just reading this as if I were reading it to my own kids. And I'll make mistakes. I'll probably make some comments on things if I find it strange as I'm reading it. All of that. It's not going to be perfect, but it's supposed to be relaxing. And if you enjoy listening to somebody read, that's cool. Doesn't matter your age. These are all going to be family appropriate books, and so we'll just jump in from there. This first book that we're reading tonight is called Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. Tom Swift was a series of books back in the 20th century, which sounds really weird to say since we're in the 21st century now, but it was first published in 1910, and this is the very first Tom Swift book. The name Victor Appleton is actually a ghostwriter name, and the character itself was created by Edward Stratemeyer, and I'm taking a lot of this from Tom Swift because I'm looking at the name from Wikipedia, and basically between Tom Swift and Tom Swift Jr., which came much, much later, there's more than 100 books in this series and has sold more than 30 million copies worldwide. I like to think of Tom Swift, and I first heard about Tom Swift when I was in elementary school, and I like to think of Tom Swift as kind of early nerd fiction. He really took the technology of the day and kind of geeked out on it. So at the time that this book was published, the motorcycle was actually kind of a newish technology. I guess technically the motorcycle had been around since the 1890s, I think I want to say. And even if that's the case, it had only been around for 20 years. So this is kind of a weird thing here. But the other reason for choosing Tom Swift, besides the fact that I really enjoyed the concept, the character when I was a kid, but let's face it, it's public domain, so I don't have to deal with any licensing issues or anything like that. So this is Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. That's the way to do it. Whoop her up, Andy. Shove the spark lever over and turn on more gasoline. We'll make a record this trip. Two lads in the tonneau of a touring car. What the hell is a tonneau? I don't know. That was whirling along a country road and leaned forward to speak to the one at the steering wheel. The latter was a red-haired youth with somewhat squinty eyes and not a very pleasant face, but his companions seemed to regard him with much favor. Perhaps it was because they were riding in his automobile. "Whoop her up, Andy," added the lad on the seat beside the driver. "This is immense." "I rather thought you'd liked it," remarked Andy Foger as he turned the car to avoid a stone in the road. "I'll make things hum around Shopton." "You've already made them hum already, Andy," commented the lad beside him. "My ears are ringing. Wow, there goes my cap." As the boy spoke, the breeze, created by the speed at which the car was traveling, lifted off his cap and sent it whirling to the rear. Andy Foger turned for an instant's glance behind him. Then he opened up the throttle still wider and exclaimed, "Let it go, Sam. We can get another. I want to see what time I can make to Mansburg. I want to break a record if I can." "Look out or you'll break something else," cried a lad on the rear seat. There's a fellow on a bicycle just ahead of us. Take care, Andy." Let him look out for himself," retorted Foger as he bent lower over the steering wheel, for the car was now going at a terrific rate. Now, I'm just going to pause here for a second. A terrific rate for a car from 1910? 30 miles an hour? Maybe? I don't know. The youth on the bicycle was riding slowly along and did not see the approaching automobile until it was nearly upon him. Then, with a mean grin, Andy Foger pressed the rubber bulb of the horn with sudden energy, sending out a series of alarming blasts. "It's Tom Swift!" cried Sam Snedeker. "Look out, or you'll run him down." "Let him keep out of my way," retorted Andy savagely. The youth on the wheel, with a sudden spurt of speed, tried to cross the highway. He did manage to do it, but by such a narrow margin that in very terror Andy Foger shut off the power, jammed down the brakes, and steered to one side. So suddenly was he obliged to swerve over that the ponderous machine skidded and went into the ditch at the side of the road, where it brought up, tilting to one side. Tom Swift, his face rather pale from his narrow escape, leaped from his bicycle and stood regarding the automobile. As for the occupants of that machine, from Andy Foger, the owner, to the three cronies who were riding with him, they all looked very much astonished. Is it damaged any, Andy?" asked Sam Snedeker. "I hope not," growled Andy. "If my car's hurt, it's Tom Swift's fault." He leaped from his seat and made a hurried inspection of the machine. He found nothing the matter, though it was more from good luck than good management. Then Andy turned and looked savagely at Tom Swift. The latter, standing his wheel up against the fence, walked forward. "What do you mean by getting in the way like that?" demanded Andy with a scowl. "Don't you see that you nearly upset me?" I love the verbiage sometimes. It's definitely from a different time. "Well, I like your nerve, Andy Foger," cried Tom. "What do you mean by nearly running me down? Why didn't you sound your horn? You automobilists take too much for granted. You were going faster than the legal rate anyhow." "I was, eh?" sneered Andy. "Yes, you were, and you know it. I'm the one to make a kick, not you." I don't even know what that means. "You came pretty near hitting me. Me getting in your way. I guess I've got some rights on the road." Go on," growled Andy, for he could think of nothing else to say. "Bicycles are a back number anyhow." "It isn't so very long that you had one," retorted Tom. "First, you fellows know, you'll be pulled over for speeding." "I guess we had better go slower, Andy," advised Sam in a low voice. "I don't want to be arrested." "Leave this to me," retorted Andy. "I'm running this tour. The next time you get in my way, I'll run you down," he threatened Tom. "Come on, fellas. We're late now and can't make a record run all on account of him." And Andy got back into the car, followed by his cronies, who had hurriedly alighted after their thrilling stop. "If you try anything like this again, you'll wish you hadn't," declared Tom, and he watched the automobile party ride off. Forget it," snapped back Andy, and he laughed, his companions joining. Tom Swift said nothing in reply. Slowly he remounted his wheel and rode off. Now, just him saying he remounted his wheel makes me think that it was like one of those bicycles with the giant wheel up front and the tiny wheel in the back. Wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it was 1910 after all. But his thoughts toward Andy Foger were not very pleasant ones. Andy was the son of a wealthy man of the town, and his good fortune in the matter of money seemed to have spoiled him, for he was a bully and a coward. Several times he and Tom Swift had clashed, for Andy was overbearing. But this was the first time Andy had shown such a vindictive spirit. "He thinks he can run over everything since he got his new auto," commented Tom aloud as he rode on. "He'll have a smash-up someday if he isn't careful. He's too fond of speeding. I wonder where he and his crowd are going." Musing over his narrow escape, Tom rode on and was soon at his home, where he lived with his widowed father, Barton Swift, a wealthy inventor, and the latter's housekeeper, Mrs. Baggert. Approaching a machine shop, one of several built near his house by Mr. Swift, in which he conducted experiments and constructed apparatus, Tom was met by his parent. "What's the matter, Tom?" asked Mr. Swift. "You look as though something happened." "Something very nearly did," answered the youth, and related his experience on the road. Remarked the inventor. "Your little pleasant jaunt might have ended disastrously. I suppose Andy and his chums are off on their trip. I remember Mr. Foger speaking to me about it the other day. He said Andy and some companions were going on a tour to be gone a week or more. Well, I'm glad it was no worse, but do you have anything special to do, Tom?" "No, I was just riding for pleasure, and if you want me to do anything, I'm ready." "Then I wish you to take this letter to Mansburg for me. I want it registered, and I don't wish to mail it in the Shopton post office. It's too important, for it's about a valuable invention." "The new turbine motor, Dad?" "That's it. And on your way, I wish you'd stop in Merton's machine shop and get some bolts he's making for me." "I will. Is that the letter?" And Tom extended his hand for a missive his father held. It's almost so formal, just the missive and valuable invention. "Yes, please be careful of it. It's to my lawyers in Washington regarding the final steps in getting a patent for the turbine." Turbines that need patents. All right. That's why I'm so particular about not wanting it mailed here. Several times before I have posted letters here, only to have the information contained in them leak out before my attorneys received them. I do not want that thing to happen in this case. Another thing, don't speak about my new invention in Merton's shop when you stop for the bolts. "Why do you think he gave out information concerning your work?" "Well, I don't exactly. He might not mean to, but he told me the other day that strangers were making inquiries of him about whether he ever did any work for me." "What did he tell them?" "He said that he occasionally did, but that most of my inventive work was done in my own shops here. He wanted to know why the men were asking such questions, and one of them said they expected to open a machine shop soon and wanted to ascertain if they might figure on getting any of my trade. But I don't believe that was their object." "What do you think it was?" "I don't know exactly, but I was somewhat alarmed when I heard this from Merton. So I'm going to take no risks. That's why I send this letter to Mansburg. Don't lose it, and don't forget about the bolts. Here's a blueprint of them so you can see if they come up to the specifications." Tom rode off on his wheel and was soon speeding. Whoa, I completely mangled that one. Tom rode off on his wheel and was soon spinning down the road. "I wonder if I'll ever meet Andy Foger and his cronies again," he thought. "Not very likely to, I guess, if they're off on a tour. Well, I'm just as well satisfied. He and I always seem to get into trouble when we meet." Tom was not destined to meet Andy again that day, but the time was to come when the red-haired bully was to cause Tom Swift no little trouble, and get him into danger besides. So Tom rode along, thinking over what his father had said to him about the letter he carried. Mr. Barton Swift was a natural inventor, period. From a boy he had been interested in. Wow. I apologize. I'm not going to apologize. This is just how I read. I'm stupid sometimes. From a boy, he had been interested in things mechanical, and one of his first efforts had been to arrange a system of pulleys, belts, and gears so that the windmill would operate the churn in the old farmhouse where he was born. The fact that the mill went so fast that it broke the churn all to pieces didn't discourage him, and he at once set to work changing the gears. His father had to buy a new churn, but the young inventor made his plan work on the second trial, and therefore his mother found butter making easy. Now, if this doesn't date this whole thing, I don't know what will. I mean, that's just from another time altogether. Okay, so from then on, Barton Swift Whoa, I just resized that window and did not mean to. From then on, Barton Swift lived in a world of inventions. People used to say he would never amount to anything, that inventors never did, but Mr. Swift proved them all wrong by amassing a considerable fortune out of his many patents. He grew up, married, and had one son, Tom. Mrs. Barton died when Tom was 3 years old, and since then he had lived with his father and a succession of nurses and housekeepers. The last woman to have charge of the household was a Mrs. Baggert, a motherly widow, and she succeeded so well. And Tom and his father formed such an attachment for her that she was now regarded as a fixture, and had now been in charge 10 years. Mr. Swift and his son lived in a handsome house on the outskirts of the village of Shopton in New York State. The village was near a large body of water, which I shall call Lake Carlopa. And there Tom and his father used to spend many pleasant days boating, for Tom and the inventor were better chums than many boys are, and they were often seen together in a craft rowing about or fishing. Of course, Tom had some boy friends, but he went with his father more often than he did with them. Though many of Mr. Swift's inventions paid him well, he was constantly seeking to perfect others. To this end, he had built near his home several machine shops with engines, lathes, and apparatus for various kinds of work. Tom, too, had the inventive fever in his veins and had planned some useful implements and small machines. Along the pleasant country roads on a fine day in April rode Tom Swift on his way to Mansburg to register the letter. As he descended a little hill, he saw, some distance away, but coming towards him, a great cloud of dust. Somebody must be driving a herd of cattle along the road, thought Tom. I hope they don't get in my way, or rather I hope I don't get in theirs. Guess I'd better keep to one side, yet there isn't too much room. The dust cloud came nearer. It was so dense that whoever or whatever was making it could not be distinguished. Must be a lot of cattle in that bunch, mused the young inventor. But I shouldn't think they'd trot them so on a warm day like this. Maybe they're stampeded. If they are, I've got to look out. This idea caused him some alarm. He tried to peer through the dust cloud, but could not. Nearer and nearer it came. Tom kept on, taking care to get as far to the side of the road as he could. Then from the midst of the enveloping mass came the sound of a steady chug-chug. "It's a motorcycle!" exclaimed Tom. He was so excited he couldn't even say the words "exclaimed Tom." He must have his muffler wide open, and that's kicking up as much dust as the wheels do. Whew! But whoever's on it will look like a clay image at the end of the line. Now, he knew it was a fellow cyclist who was raising such a disturbance. Tom turned more towards the middle of the road. As yet he had not had a sight of the rider, but the explosions of the motor were louder. Suddenly, when the first advancing particles of the dust reached him, almost making him sneeze, Tom caught the sight of the rider. He was a man of middle age and was clinging to the handlebars of the machine. The motor was going full speed. Tom quickly turned to one side to avoid the worst of the dust. The motorcyclist glanced at the youth, but this act nearly proved disastrous for him. He took his eyes from the road ahead just for a moment, and he did not see a large stone directly in his path. His front wheel hit it, and the heavy machine, which he could not control very well, skidded over toward the lad on the bicycle. The motorcyclist bounced up in the air from the saddle and nearly lost his hold on the handlebars. "Look out!" cried Tom. "You'll smash into me." "I'm trying not to," were the words that rattled out of the middle-aged man. Tom gave his wheel a desperate twist to get out of the way. The motorcyclist tried to do the same, but the machine he was on appeared to want matters its own way. He came straight for Tom, and a disastrous collision might have resulted had not another stone been in the way. The front wheel hit and was swerved to one side. The motorcycle flashed past Tom, just grazing his wheel, and then was lost to sight beyond in a cloud of dust that seemed to follow it like a halo. "Why don't you learn how to ride the road before you come out?" cried Tom somewhat angrily. Like an echo from the dust cloud came floating back these words. I'm trying to. Then the sound of the explosions became fainter. Well, he's got lots to learn yet, exclaimed Tom. That's twice today I've nearly been run down. I expect I'd better look out for the third time. They say that's always fatal. And the lad leaped from his wheel. I wonder if he bent any of my spokes, the young inventor continued as he inspected his bicycle. And thus ends Chapter 1. So we're going to take a little bit of a break so I can get a drink, and we will continue with Chapter 2 in just a moment. Okay, guys, so this is the point where I'm going to either split these into two separate audio files, or I'm going to have it's going to be like a section for people online. So, for those of you in the chat room, now will be the time that I will interact with you. Because that's, I want to make time each time when I'm doing the Twitch thing. And then the audio portion, when I do the podcast of it, it'll cut out this section. So, let's see. Who do we have? We have Nicole, Commander Root, Duome FTH, Host Me Raffle, S1 Faka, Skippy KGT, Soapbox GSTU, Tony P, who is probably not Tony P. Henderson, and Windsock. Welcome. Hey, how things going tonight? It is Tony P. Henderson. Why do you have another account, Tony? I don't know, Duome, how I'm going to do that. So, Tony, you're not going to have the Tony P. Henderson thing? Oh, is it just a label? I wasn't sure how they let you change your name. That's all. So I anticipate doing about an hour per night that I read these things, and I haven't decided on the actual schedule yet. So Tuesday night's looking like they're going to work out. But I want to. I'd love to, if I can do 2 chapters a night in an hour, I'm cool. I'm happy with that. From a podcast standpoint, I don't know. I'd love to hear some feedback from you guys. Should I break it up into chapters, or should I leave it as like an hour-long segment? Oh, and you think a full book download? Really? I don't know. That seems weird, and hadn't considered that. I might consider that. But because, again, like I said before, I'm not really trying to do an audiobook aspect of this thing. It's more of just a storyteller type thing. So, Tony, you're thinking definitely chapters. So if the chapters end up being about a half an hour long, give or take, that'll be okay. That anything between, anything under an hour seems fine. Duome, I'll definitely give that a thought. So for you guys who have been here, how is it coming across? Is it working? A chapter and discussion of it. I hadn't even thought about the discussion aspect of it. Huh. Let me think on that, Tony. Because, like, I want there to be a reason to have the Twitch thing. But people had actually asked me multiple times to make it an audio podcast as well. Kind of a book club. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Tony. I may talk to you about that a little bit. Because I don't know how that looks yet. I don't know how that looks yet. But like this chatter right here, I don't plan on doing that as part of the podcast. This is for Twitch and potentially the YouTube video, because I want to give the YouTube thing. I want to make sure that happens as well. So, but the storytelling aspect of things, it's working for you guys. I mean, I know there's not a lot of people in the chat room. Oh, I'm definitely recording it. I'm recording everything, Duame. So, yeah. But I just want to make sure that this is coming across as at least somewhat interesting that people are going to want to listen to. That's all. I mean, I'm having a good time reading it. I don't know how it's coming across. So, Skippy, are you still here? Or are you and Paul? I have a feeling Paul probably paused. Yes. Well, so I want to do 1 hour chunks of recording. That's the difference, Skippy. So it could be 2 podcasts per night. I don't really. I that's why I'm saying I think it's a little different. And I can talk to you guys after I get done recording. So, all right, I've had something to drink. Let's oh yeah, I know I can split up the audio later. All right, let's get back to this. Switch back to comfy mode. Okay, welcome back. Chapter 2. Tom overhears something. Everything seems to be all right, Tom remarked, but another inch or so and he'd have crashed into me. I wonder who he was. I wish I had a machine like that. I could make better time than I can on my bicycle. Perhaps I'll get one someday. Well, I might as well ride on. Tom was soon at Mansburg and, going to the post office, handed in the letter for registry. Bearing in mind his father's words, he looked about to see if there were any suspicious characters, but the only person he noticed was a well-dressed man with a black mustache, who seemed to be intently studying the schedule of the arrival and departure of the mails. "Do you want the receipt for the registered letter sent to you here or at Shopton?" asked the clerk of Tom. "Come to think of it, though, it'll have to come here, and you can call for it. I'll have it returned to Mr. Barton Swift, care of General Delivery, and you can get it over the next time you're over here." For the clerk knew Tom. "That'll do," answered our hero, and he turned away from the window. And as he turned away from the window, he saw that the man who had been inquiring about the mails was regarding him curiously. Even this whole mail thing is so from a different time. It's really interesting. Tom thought nothing of it at the time, but there came an occasion where he wished that he had taken more careful note of the well-dressed individual. As the youth passed out of the outer door, he saw the man walk over to the registry window. He seems to have considerable mail business, thought Tom, and then the matter passed from his mind as he mounted his wheel and hurried to the machine shop. "Say, I'm awfully sorry," announced Mr. Merton when Tom said he'd come from the bolts, "but they're not quite done. They need polishing. I know I promised them to your father today, and he can have them, but he was very particular about the polish. And as one of my best workers was taken sick, I'm a little behind." "How long will it take to polish them?" asked Tom. "Oh, about an hour. In fact, a man is working on them now. If you could call this afternoon, they'll be ready. Can you? I suppose I gotta, replied Tom good-naturedly. Guess I'll have to stay in Mansburg for dinner. I can't get back to Shopton in time now. I'll be sure to have them for you after dinner, promised Mr. Merton. Now, there's a matter I want to speak to you about, Tom. Has your father any idea of giving the work he has been turning over to me for some other firm? Wow, that was clunky. Now, has your father any idea of giving the work he has been turning over to me to some other firm? Okay. Basically, he just is he going to use somebody else to do the work? Not that I know of. Why? And the lad showed his wonder. Well, I'll tell you why. Some time ago, there was a stranger in here asking about your father's work. I told Mr. Swift of it at the time. The stranger said then that he and some others were thinking of opening a machine shop, and he wanted to find out whether they would be likely to get any jobs from your father. I told the man I knew nothing about Mr. Swift's business, and he went away. I didn't hear any more of it, though. Of course, I didn't want to lose your father's trade. Now, a funny thing happened. Only this morning, the same man was back here, and he was making particular inquiries about your father's private machine shops. He was? Exclaimed Tom excitedly. Yeah, he wanted to know where they were located and how they were laid out and what sort of work he did in them. What did you tell him? Nothing at all. I suspected something, and I said the best way for him to find out would be to go and see your father. Wasn't that right? Sure. Dad doesn't want his business known any more than he can help. What do you suppose they wanted? Well, the man talked as though he and his partners would like to buy your father's shops. I don't believe he'd sell. He has them arranged just for his own use in making patents, and I'm sure he wouldn't dispose of them. Well, that's what I thought, but I didn't tell the man so. I judged it would be best for him to find out for himself. What was the man's name? He didn't tell me, and I didn't ask him. How did he look? Well, he was well dressed, wore kid gloves and all that, and a little black mustache. Tom started, and Mr. Merton noticed it. Do you know him? He asked. No, replied Tom, but I saw... Then he stopped. He recalled the man he had seen in the post office. He answered this description, but it was too vague to be certain. Did you say you'd seen him? Asked Mr. Merton, regarding Tom curiously. No, yes, I'll tell my father about it, stammered Tom, who concluded that it would be best to say nothing of his suspicions. I'll be right back after dinner, Mr. Merton. Please have the bolts ready for me if you can. I will. Is your father going to use them in a new machine? Yeah, Dad is always making new machines, answered the youth, as the most polite way of not giving the proprietor of the shop any information. I'll be back right after dinner, he called, and he went out to get on his wheel. Tom was much puzzled. He felt certain that the man in the post office and the one who had questioned Mr. Merton were the same. There's something going on, and Dad should know about it, reflected Tom. I must tell him. I don't believe it will be wise to send any more of his patent work over to Merton. We must do it in the shops at home, and Dad and I will have to keep our eyes open. There may be spies about seeking to discover something about his new turbine motor. I'll hurry back with those bolts and tell Dad. But first, I must get lunch. I'll go to the restaurant and have a good feed while I'm at it. Tom had plenty of spending money, some of which came from a small patent he had marketed himself. He left his wheel outside the restaurant, first taking precaution to chain the wheels, and then went inside. Tom was hungry and ordered a good meal. He was about halfway through it when someone called his name. Hello, Ned, he answered, looking up to see a youth about his own age. Where'd you blow in from? Oh, I came over from Shopton this morning, replied Ned Newton, taking a seat at the table with Tom. The two lads were chums, and in their younger days had often gone fishing, swimming, and hunting together. Now, Ned worked in the Shopton bank, and Tom was so busy helping his father, so they did not see each other very often. On business or a pleasure? Asked Tom, putting some more sugar in his coffee. Business. I had to bring over some papers from our bank to the First National here, but what about you? I came on Dad's account. Invented anything new? Asked Ned as he gave his order to the waitress. No, nothing since the egg beater I was telling you about, but I'm working on some things. Why don't you invent an automobile or an airship? Maybe I will someday, but speaking of autos, did you see the one Andy Foger has? Yeah, it's a beaut. Have you seen it? Altogether, too close range. He nearly ran over me this morning, and the young inventor related the occurrence. Andy was always too fresh, commented Ned. And since his father let him get the touring car, I suppose he'll be worse than ever. Well, if he tries to run me down again, he'll get into trouble, declared Tom, calling for a second cup of coffee. The two chums began conversing on more congenial topics, and Ned was telling him a new camera he had when, from a table directly behind him, Tom heard someone say in rather loud tones, "The plant is located in Shopton, all right, and the buildings are near the Swifts' house." Tom started and listened more intently. That'll make it more difficult, one man answered. But if the invention is as valuable as... Hush! Came a caution from another party. This is too public a place to discuss the matter. Wait until we get out. One of us will have to see Swift, of course, and if he proves stubborn... I guess you better hush yourself, retorted the man who had first spoken, and then the voices subsided. But Tom Swift had overheard something which made him vaguely afraid. He started so at the sound of his father's name that he knocked a fork from the table. What's the matter? Getting nervous? Asked Ned with a laugh. I guess so, replied Tom, and when he stooped to pick the fork up, not waiting for the girl who was serving at his table, he stole a look at the strangers who had just entered. He was startled to note that one of the men was the same that he had seen in the post office, the man who answered the description of the one who had been inquiring of Mr. Merton about the Swift shops. I'm going to keep my ears open, thought Tom, as he went on eating his dinner. And that's the end of chapter 2, if you can believe it. Okay, so this is really weird because I can't gauge the chapters. So I am going to do one more chapter, I think, if it looks like they're going to be this small. But I'm going to take another drink, and we'll take a little bit of a break. Oh, Dwomey, that's cool, man. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Seriously, I gotta tell you, that pumps me up. I'm really stoked about that. Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. All right, so let's see. I'm going to check out here. And so I do want to thank you guys for hanging out. Because... Oh, Sen, man, you're listening? That's cool. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm enjoying doing it. So, let me flip this. There we go. I'm digging this. I'm having fun doing it. That's cool, man. I am gonna want to get some feedback from you guys, and we'll chat in Discord. I'll put together like a private chat type thing or something, because clearly I want this to be as good as it can be, and I really want to get some honest feedback from you guys. So green screen, is that what you're thinking of? Green screen? Yeah, okay. So that's a technology improvement. I am working on a title card. I've got an artist friend of the network who's working on that, and she's also going to be helping me work on some imaging. So some things from a visual standpoint may change. This background right here is something that I am desperately trying to get in touch with the author of it to get full permission from. I've written him a number of times. I tweeted him, and he's still not responded yet. I got you, man. Yeah. So, So we'll see how it goes. But I'm very happy with the way this is going so far. At least from the way that it's. I'm hoping it's coming across well. That's all. But thank you guys for hanging. All right, let's go to chapter 3. I'll put this back to storytime mode. Chapter 3. In a smash-up. Though the young inventor listened intently in an endeavor to hear the conversation of the men at the table behind him, all he could catch was an indistinct murmur. The strangers appeared to have heeded the caution of one of their number and were speaking in low tones. Tom and Ned finished their meal and started to leave the restaurant. As Mr. Swift's son passed the table where the men sat, they looked up quickly at him. Two of them gave Tom a passing glance, but one, he whom the young inventor had noticed in the post office, stared long and intently. I think he'll know me the next time he sees me, thought Tom, and he boldly returned the glance of the stranger. The bolts were ready when the inventor's son called at the machine shop a second time, and making a package of them, Tom fastened it to the saddle of his bicycle. He started for home at a fast pace and was just turning from a crossroad into the main highway when he saw ahead of him a woman driving a light wagon. As the sun flashed on Tom's shining wheel, the horse gave a sudden leap, swerved to one side, and then bolted down the dusty stretch. The woman screamed at the top of her voice. "A runaway!" cried Tom, "and partly my fault, too." Waiting not an instant, the lad bent over his handlebars and pedaled with all of his force. His bicycle seemed fairly to leap forward after the galloping horse. "Sit still! Don't jump out! Don't jump!" yelled the young inventor. "I'll try to catch him." For the woman was standing up in front of the seat and leaning forward, as if about to leap from the wagon. "She's lost her head," thought Tom. "No wonder, that's a skittish horse." Faster and faster he rode, bending all his energies to overtake the animal. The wagon was swaying from side to side, and more than once the woman just saved herself from being thrown out by grasping the edge of the seat. She found that her standing position was a dangerous one and crouched on the bottom of the swaying vehicle. "That's better," shouted Tom, but it's doubtful if she heard him, for the rattling of the wagon and the hoofbeats of the horse drowned out all other sounds. "Sit still," he shouted. "I'll stop the horse for you." Trying to imagine himself in a desperate race in order to excite himself to greater speed, Tom continued on. He was now even with the tailboard of the wagon and slowly creeping up. The woman was all huddled up in a lump. "Grab the reins! Grab the reins!" shouted Tom. "Saw on the bit! That'll stop 'em!" I don't even know what that means. The occupant of the wagon turned to look at the lad. Tom saw that she was a handsome young lady. "Grab the reins!" he cried again. "Pull hard!" I can't!" she answered frightenedly. "They've dropped down! Oh, do please stop the horse! I'm so frightened!" "I'll stop him," declared the youth firmly, and he set his teeth hard. Then he saw the reason the fair driver could not grasp the lines. They had slipped over the dashboard and were trailing on the ground. As I'm reading this, all I can think of is the whole music sound effects from the old cartoons. The horse was slacking speed a bit now, for the pace was telling on his wind. Tom saw his opportunity, and with a sudden burst of energy was at the animal's head. Steering his wheel with one hand, and with the other, the lad made a grab for the reins near the bit. The horse swerved frightenedly to one side, but Tom swung in the same direction. He grasped the leather and then, with a kick, freed himself from the bicycle, giving it a shove to one side. He was now clinging to the reins with both hands, and being a muscular lad and no lightweight, his bulk told. "Sit still," panted our hero to the young woman, who had risen in the seat. "I'll have him stopped in half a minute now." It was in less time than that, for the horse, finding it impossible to shake off the grip of Tom, began to slow from a gallop to a trot, then to a canter, and finally to a slow walk. A moment later, the horse had stopped, breathing heavily from his run. There now," spoke Tom soothingly. "You're all right, old fella. I hope you're not hurt." This to the young lady, and Tom made a motion to raise his cap, only to find that it had blown off. "Oh, no, I'm more frightened than hurt." "It was all my fault," declared the young inventor. "I should not have swung into the road so suddenly. My bicycle alarmed your horse." "Oh, I fancy Dobbin is easily disturbed," admitted the fair driver. "I can't thank you enough for stopping him. You saved me from a bad accident." "It was the least I could do. Are you all right now?" And he handed up the dangling reins. "I think Dobbin, as you call him, has had enough running," went on Tom, for the horse was now quiet. "I hope so. I'm all right. I trust your wheel is not damaged. If it is, my father, Mr. Amos Nestor of Mansburg, will gladly pay for its repair." This reminded the young inventor of his bicycle, and making sure that the horse would not start up again, he went to where his wheel and his cap lay. He found that the only damage to the bicycle was a few bent spokes, and straightening them and having again apologized to the young woman, receiving in turn her pardon and thanks, and learning that her name was Mary Nestor, Tom once more resumed his trip. The wagon followed him at a distance, the horse evincing no desire now to get out of a slow amble. Evincing no desire. I guess means he just had no desire to get out of a slow amble. That's what I would guess. "Well, things are certainly happening to me today," mused Tom as he pedaled on. "That might have been a serious runaway if there'd been anything in the road." Tom did not stop to think that he had been mainly instrumental in preventing a bad accident, as he had been the innocent cause of starting the runaway. But Tom was ever a modest lad. His arms were wrenched from jerking on the bridle, but he did not mind that much, and bent over the handlebars to make up for lost time. Now our hero was within a short distance of his house, and was coasting easily along when, just ahead of him, he saw a cloud of dust, very similar to the one that had, some time before, concealed the inexperienced motorcyclist. "I wonder if that's him again," thought Tom. "If it is, I'm going to hang back and see which way he's heading. No use running any more risks." Almost at that moment, a puff of wind blew some of the dust to one side. Tom had a glimpse of the man on the puffing machine. "It's the same chap," he exclaimed aloud, "and he's going the same way I am. Well, I'll try not to catch up to him. I wonder what he's been doing all this while, that he hasn't gotten any further than this. Either he's been riding back and forth, or else he's been resting. My, but he certainly is scooting along." The wind carried to Tom the sound of the explosions of the motor, and he could see the man clinging tightly to the handlebars. The rider was almost in front of Tom's house now, when, with a suddenness that caused the lad to utter an exclamation of alarm, the stranger turned his machine right towards a big oak tree. "I wonder what he's up to," cried Tom excitedly. "Does he think he can climb that, or is he giving an exhibition by showing how close he can come and not hit it?" A moment later, the motorcyclist struck the tree a glancing blow. The man went flying over the handlebars. The machine was shunted into the ditch all along the road, and falling over on one side, the motor raced furiously. The rider lay in a heap at the foot of the tree. "My, that was a smash!" cried Tom. "He must be killed." And bending forward, he raced towards the scene of the accident. And thus concludes tonight's broadcast. Chapter 4 next week. And Chapter 4 is called Tom and a Motorcycle. Okay, so it is definitely looking like I'm going to be able to get like 3 chapters in a 1-hour session, which is awesome. Because that means if we cut it into chapters, it'll be about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes a piece. I think that's cool. We're on Chapter 4. Let's see, I'm going to bookmark this. And yeah, let's see. I want to make sure I can bookmark it. Bookmark. Okay. And perfect. And let's go back here. There are 25 chapters. So cool. I'm digging it. All right, so I am going to stop the recording now and then just hang and chat with you guys for a little bit.